The husband smirked in court until the wife revealed one hidden detail. "Take it all," Douglas sneered, his voice dripping with venom as he leaned across the polished mahogany of the courtroom table. "The house, the cars, the bank accounts. Go ahead, Rachel, take half of absolutely zero." A slow, chilling smirk spread across his handsome face, the arrogant expression of a man who knew he had successfully buried his millions where no judge would ever find them. "You're walking out of here with nothing but the clothes on your back." Beside him, his high-priced lawyer chuckled. But Rachel didn't cry. She didn't scream. Instead, she looked him dead in the eye and smiled. She had found the one detail he missed. The crystal champagne flutes clinked with the delicate, expensive sound of extreme wealth. 300 of Westchester's elite were gathered under the sprawling, fairy-light-draped canopy on the back lawn of the Reed estate. It was Rachel and Douglas's 15th wedding anniversary, and Douglas, ever the showman, had spared no expense. A 12-piece string quartet played a modern symphony in the corner. Waitstaff in crisp white tuxedos glided through the crowd, carrying trays of beluga caviar and truffle-infused tartlets, and the air was thick with the scent of imported orchids and expensive perfumes. Rachel stood near the towering ice sculpture, a swan, taking flight, wearing a custom emerald green silk gown that Douglas had personally selected for her. She felt like a queen. For 15 years, she had been the quiet, steadfast foundation upon which Douglas had built Reed Enterprises, transforming it from a scrappy, two-man real estate startup operating out of their cramped apartment into a multi-million-dollar empire. Douglas stepped up to the microphone positioned on the grand limestone terrace. He tapped it twice, the rhythmic thump-thump silencing the murmuring crowd. He looked magnificent in his bespoke velvet dinner jacket, his silver-flecked hair catching the ambient lighting. "Friends, colleagues, loved ones," Douglas began, his rich, baritone voice washing over the lawn. 15 years ago, I was a broke dreamer with a lot of ambition and absolutely zero capital. But I had something better than a bank loan. I had Rachel." He paused, finding her in the crowd, his eyes crinkling with what looked like profound adoration. "She worked 3 jobs. She balanced our checkbook to the penny. She believed in me when the banks laughed me out of their lobbies. Rachel, my love, you are my rock, my compass, and my heart. Here is to the next 15 years. And beyond." The crowd erupted into applause. Women dabbed their eyes. Men raised their glasses in salute. Rachel felt a warm, golden flush rise to her cheeks. She loved this man with a fierce, uncompromising devotion. As the applause died down, the microphone let out a sharp, ear-piercing squeal of feedback. Douglas winced, tapping it again. Nothing. He caught Rachel's eye and gave a subtle, exasperated tilt of his head toward the house, followed by a mouthing of the words, "Spare battery. My office." Rachel nodded, instantly slipping into her role as the fixer. She navigated through the sea of well-wishers, accepting congratulations and compliments with practiced grace, and slipped through the French doors into the quiet, air-conditioned sanctuary of the main house. Douglas's home office was strictly off-limits to everyone, including the cleaning staff. It was a masculine fortress of dark mahogany, leather, and walls lined with architectural blueprints. The door was usually locked with a digital keypad, but tonight it was slightly ajar. Rachel frowned. She remembered seeing William Vance, Douglas's notoriously ruthless corporate attorney, slipping into the house earlier for a quick business call. William must have failed to pull the heavy oak door completely shut. Rachel stepped inside. The room was dark, save for the blue moonlight spilling through the plantation shutters and the harsh, bright glow of Douglas's open laptop on the massive executive desk. Douglas never left his computer unlocked. He was paranoid about corporate espionage. But William had been using it, and William was famously careless with technology. Rachel walked around the desk to open the top drawer, where Douglas kept the microphone equipment. As her hand brushed the edge of the desk, she accidentally bumped the wireless mouse. The laptop screen, which had dimmed to save power, flared to full, blinding brightness. Rachel didn't mean to look. She was not a snooping wife, but the spreadsheet displayed on the screen was massive, and the numbers were too large to ignore. It wasn't a standard Reed Enterprises balance sheet. It was an offshore banking portal for an institution based in the Cayman Islands. Her eyes scanned the top line. Account holder, Apex Page Holdings Limited. Below it was a list of recent wire transfers. Her breath hitched in her throat as she read the origins of the funds. They were all from Reed Enterprises' primary operating accounts, the same accounts Douglas had claimed were running dangerously low due to a sluggish market. $2,500,000. Consulting fees. $4 million. Asset reallocation. $5,500,000. Development retainer. A total of $12 million had been siphoned out of their marital assets in the last 90 days. Rachel's hands began to tremble. A cold, heavy stone of dread dropped into her stomach. She leaned closer to the screen. Behind the banking window, a secure messaging app was open. The chat was between Douglas and someone named Paige. Rachel knew a Paige. She was a 26-year-old junior interior designer who had been hired to stage Douglas's new luxury condos. Rachel's eyes locked onto the most recent messages, sent just 30 minutes ago, right before Douglas walked out to give his speech. Paige, is the circus over yet? I hate that you're playing the devoted husband for that crowd. It makes me sick. Douglas, almost over, baby. I'm about to give the speech. I have to play the part perfectly. She's completely clueless. Did William finalize the final transfer? Paige, yes. The $12 million is secure in the Apex account. The title for the new estate clears tomorrow. Douglas, good. Tomorrow morning, I drop the axe. The company accounts will show massive debt, and she'll be legally tied to a sinking ship. She won't see it coming, and she won't get a single dime. Pack your bags for street barts. Paige, I love you. Destroy her. Rachel stopped breathing. The opulent, mahogany-scented air of the office suddenly felt like thick, suffocating water. Destroy her. The words burned into her retinas. The man who was currently outside, being toasted as the husband of the decade, was actively plotting to annihilate her. He was stealing the wealth she had helped build, leaving her with the manufactured debt and running off with a woman nearly half his age. A primal, violent wave of nausea washed over her. She clutched the edge of the desk, her knuckles turning white, fighting the urge to vomit onto the Persian rug. Her mind fractured into a million jagged pieces. 15 years. The sacrifices, the late nights, the unwavering trust. It was all a meticulously constructed theater. Panic urged her to run. It screamed at her to storm out to the terrace, flip the microphone back on, and expose him to the 300 people drinking his champagne. But the cold, analytical part of her brain, the part that had successfully managed their chaotic early finances, snapped into focus with terrifying clarity. If she confronted him now, he would lock down the computer, deny everything, and use his immense wealth and legal power to crush her before she could gather proof. With shaking hands, Rachel pulled her phone from her clutch. She opened the camera and began taking burst photos. She photographed the offshore bank balances, the account numbers, the routing information, and every single sickening line of the chat log. She made sure the time and date were visible on the computer screen. When she was finished, she found the spare battery in the drawer. She nudged the mouse so the screen dimmed back to black, carefully stepped out of the office, and pulled the heavy door shut until it clicked and locked. Rachel stood in the hallway for 3 full minutes, practicing how to breathe. She smoothed the silk of her emerald gown. She forced her facial muscles to relax, painting on a mask of serene, wifely contentment. She walked back out to the terrace. The warm summer air hit her, carrying the sound of laughter and the string quartet. Douglas was standing by the bar, holding court, laughing heartily at a joke William Vance had just told. Rachel walked up to him, her heart beating a frantic, agonizing rhythm against her ribs. "Here you go, darling," Rachel said, her voice impossibly smooth as she handed him the battery. "Thank you, my love." Douglas smiled, leaning down to press a warm, lingering kiss against her lips. It felt like the touch of a corpse. "What would I do without you?" Rachel looked deeply into his eyes, seeing the dark, arrogant void hiding behind his charming facade. She smiled back, a perfect, chilling replica of his own deception. "You'd be lost, Douglas, completely lost." For the next 3 hours, Rachel danced. She drank champagne. She smiled until her jaw ached, enduring the psychological torture of playing the beloved wife while knowing she was marked for slaughter. It was the performance of a lifetime, and it was only the beginning. The morning sun crested the Westchester Hills, casting long, harsh shadows across the debris of the anniversary party. The caterers had long since departed, leaving behind a sprawling lawn littered with deflated balloons, half-empty champagne bottles, and the lingering ghost of a colossal lie. Rachel sat at the massive granite island in the kitchen. She hadn't slept a single second. She had spent the entire night locked in the guest bathroom, staring at the photos on her phone, committing every account number and devastating text message to memory. She had watched the sun rise, with a terrifying, hollow calmness. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hardened core of absolute fury. At 8 a.m., the heavy oak front door opened and closed. Douglas walked into the kitchen. The charming, affectionate husband from the night before was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical stranger. He wore a sharp, charcoal gray suit, and his face was set in a rigid mask of calculated indifference. He didn't greet her. He didn't pour himself coffee. He stood on the opposite side of the kitchen island, looking at her as if she were a piece of defective machinery he needed to discard. Before he could speak, the doorbell rang. A sharp, authoritative buzz. "That will be William," Douglas said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Rachel played her part. She furrowed her brow in manufactured confusion. "William? Douglas? What is going on? Why is William here at 8 in the morning on a Sunday?" Douglas walked to the foyer and returned a moment later with William Vance and a nervous-looking man holding a thick manila envelope. William looked entirely too cheerful for the hour, a predatory glint in his shark-like eyes. "Rachel Reed?" the nervous man asked. "Yes?" The man dropped the heavy envelope onto the granite island. "You've been served." He turned and practically sprinted out the front door. Rachel stared at the envelope, letting her hands tremble slightly. "Served? Served for what?" "I'm filing for divorce, Rachel," Douglas said, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "I'm leaving. In fact, my bags are already packed and in the car. I'm moving into the penthouse downtown." Rachel let out a choked gasp, forcing tears to well in her eyes. "Divorce? Douglas, why? Last night you said I was your rock. We celebrated 15 years. I don't understand." "Last night was for the investors, Rachel," Douglas sneered, a flash of genuine cruelty breaking through his stoic mask. "It was optics. The truth is, I'm suffocating. And more importantly, the business is failing. The market has bottomed out, our lenders are calling in their notes, and Reed Enterprises is carrying over $40 million in toxic debt. We are virtually bankrupt." It was exactly what the text messages had promised. He was executing the slaughter. William stepped forward, placing a manicured hand on the island. "Let's be pragmatic about this, Rachel. Douglas is a reasonable man. Despite the catastrophic financial state of the marital assets, he is willing to assume the entirety of the corporate debt. In exchange, he is prepared to offer you a modest severance settlement of $250,000. It's enough for you to find a quiet apartment and start over." "$250,000? Rachel whispered, letting her voice crack perfectly. "This house is worth $10 million. This house is heavily mortgaged to float the failing business," William corrected smoothly. "It will be foreclosed upon by the end of the month. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Furthermore, to prevent any emotional spending, your joint credit cards and access to the primary checking accounts have been temporarily frozen." Rachel looked at Douglas. He was watching her tears with a look of supreme boredom. He truly believed he had outsmarted her. He believed she was a weak, dependent creature who would crumble under the weight of his fabricated financial ruin. "I need time," Rachel sobbed, burying her face in her hands to hide the fact that there were no actual tears falling. "I need to talk to a lawyer." "Take all the time you need, Rachel," Douglas said, checking his diamond Rolex. "But the offer is off the table in 48 hours. If you try to fight me on this, I promise you, the legal fees alone will leave you with nothing. Don't be stupid." With a final, dismissive glance, Douglas turned and walked out of the house, William trailing behind him like a loyal, venomous hound. The moment the door clicked shut, Rachel dropped her hands. Her face was entirely dry. The trembling stopped. She walked calmly to the kitchen phone and dialed her younger sister, Ashley. "Ash," Rachel said, her voice sharp and steady. "It happened. Bring your laptop and come to the house. Now." Ashley arrived 20 minutes later, tires squealing on the wet driveway. Ashley was a fiery, no-nonsense accountant who had never liked Douglas, sensing his arrogance beneath the charm long before Rachel ever did. Rachel sat Ashley down at the kitchen table and slid her phone across the granite. "Swipe right." Ashley swiped through the photos. As she read the offshore balances and the sickening text messages between Douglas and Paige, Ashley's face morphed from confusion to horror, and finally, to a white-hot, explosive rage. "That son of a bitch," Ashley hissed, slamming her hand on the table. "I knew it. I knew he was cooking the books, but $12 million? And he's trying to saddle you with $40 million in fake debt? This is criminal fraud, Rach. This isn't just a divorce. It's a heist." "I know," Rachel said coldly. "He locked me out of the accounts this morning. He thinks he's cut off my oxygen. But he doesn't know I have these photos." "Photos of a screen are a good start, but they can be contested in court," Ashley warned, her accountant brain taking over. "William Vance will claim you photoshopped them or that they depict a demo account. We need a bulldog. We need a lawyer who isn't afraid of Vance and who knows how to pierce corporate veils. Do you know anyone?" A slow, vicious smile spread across Ashley's face. "I know exactly who we need. Grab your coat. We're going to the bad side of town." An hour later, Rachel found herself sitting in an office that felt a world away from the gleaming glass skyscrapers of William Vance's firm. Zachary Thorne's law office was sandwiched between a bail bondsman and a struggling laundromat. The waiting room smelled faintly of stale coffee and old case files. Zachary was a man in his late 30s, with perpetually rumpled hair, an untucked shirt, and dark circles under his eyes that spoke of too much caffeine and too little sleep. He had once been a rising star in corporate litigation until he blew the whistle on a corrupt partner, a partner who happened to be William Vance's mentor. Vance had successfully destroyed Zachary's corporate career, exiling him to the strip mall. Zachary sat behind his cluttered desk, reviewing the divorce papers William had served. Then, he looked at the printed copies of the photos Rachel had taken. He didn't say a word for 5 minutes. He just kept flipping between the fake bankruptcy documents and the photos of the $12 million offshore account. Finally, he looked up, a feral, terrifying grin splitting his face. "Vance is using the sudden evaporation tactic," Zachary said, leaning back in his squeaky chair. "It's a classic. Funnel the liquid assets into an unreachable offshore shell company, inflate the domestic debt with phantom loans, and starve the spouse into accepting a garbage settlement." "Can we stop it?" Rachel asked. "The Cayman accounts are a fortress," Zachary admitted, tapping a pen against his chin. "Vance knows what he's doing. Apex Page Holdings Limited is likely layered behind 3 other anonymous trusts. Even with these photos, proving Douglas is the beneficial owner of that account will take years of international litigation, years you don't have, because you're broke." Rachel felt a flicker of despair. "So he wins? He just gets away with stealing my life?" "I didn't say that," Zachary said, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "Douglas made a mistake. He's arrogant. Arrogant men always leave a fingerprint. They didn't just burn $12 million. They moved it. People like Douglas don't keep cash sitting in a vault. They buy things, assets, real estate. If we can find what he bought with that $12 million and tie it to Page here in the States, we don't need to breach the Caymans. We just seize the asset." Zachary leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "We let them think they are winning. We go into mediation, and we let them flex their fake debt. We let them get comfortable. And while they are gloating, we hunt down where that money landed." He extended a hand across the desk. "Are you ready to go to war, Mrs. Reed?" Rachel took his hand, her grip like iron. "I want him ruined, Mr. Thorne. Completely and utterly ruined." The downtown courthouse was a towering monolith of gray concrete, designed to make those entering feel small and insignificant. The mediation room on the 4th floor was a sterile, windowless box with humming fluorescent lights and a heavy, scarred wooden table that had witnessed thousands of ruined lives. Rachel sat beside Zachary, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had deliberately chosen to wear a simple, unbranded beige dress, her hair pulled back in a severe, modest ponytail. She wore no makeup. She looked exhausted, pale, and entirely defeated. It was exactly the image Zachary had instructed her to project. Let him gorge himself on his own ego, Zachary had told her in the hallway. We need him blind. The door swung open, and Douglas walked in, immediately sucking all the oxygen from the room. He wore a stunning, custom-tailored navy suit that screamed wealth and power. He looked vibrant, rested, and aggressively confident. William Vance shadowed him, carrying 3 thick, leather-bound binders that he dropped onto the table with an intimidating, heavy thud. Douglas didn't even look at Rachel. He sat down, adjusted his expensive silk tie, and let William take the floor. The mediator, a weary, gray-haired man named Judge Harrison, took his seat at the head of the table. Let us save everyone some valuable time, William began, his voice dripping with smooth condescension. My client is eager to resolve this unfortunate matter swiftly. As you can see from the audited financial disclosures in front of you, Reed Enterprises has experienced a catastrophic financial collapse over the last 3 quarters. William slid one of the massive binders across the table toward Zachary. The commercial real estate sector has punished us. 3 major developments have stalled indefinitely. Currently, the marital estate is carrying $42 million in heavily leveraged debt. The family home is in pre-foreclosure. The liquid assets have been entirely depleted to satisfy our aggressive creditors. Zachary flipped open the binder, skimming the pages with an expression of overwhelmed confusion, playing the part of the out-of-his-depth strip mall lawyer perfectly. Rachel kept her eyes on the table, but her mind was racing. $42 million in debt. It was a masterclass in creative accounting, given the insolvency of the estate. William continued, steepling his fingers. Mr. Reed is willing to assume the entirety of this crushing debt burden, so that Mrs. Reed is not forced into personal bankruptcy. In exchange for a clean break and a waiver of all future claims, we are offering a one-time, tax-free settlement of $250,000. Rachel slowly lifted her head. She looked directly at Douglas. For a fleeting second, their eyes met. Douglas's lips curled upward. It was a slow, deliberate smirk. It was a look of absolute, predatory triumph. He looked at her not as a woman he had loved for 15 years, but as a nuisance he had successfully outmaneuvered. He genuinely believed she was terrified. He believed she would snatch at the $250,000 like a starving dog taking a bone, just to escape the terrifying mountain of fake debt he had built to crush her. $250,000, Zachary said, his voice hesitant, rubbing the back of his neck. That's, well, given my client's 15-year contribution to the marriage, it seems a bit light, counselor. What about the marina project? I heard that was slated to be highly profitable. Douglas laughed a harsh barking sound. The marina project is a black hole, Thorne. It bled us dry. Environmental holdups, corrupt contractors. We lost $8 million on that dirt pit alone? Rachel's eyes narrowed infinitesimally. The marina project. Before he had locked her out of the home office, she had seen the final environmental clearance forms. The project was green-lit and heavily subsidized. He was lying through his teeth, using it as a sinkhole to explain the missing cash. I see. Zachary sighed, closing the binder. He looked at Rachel with a manufactured expression of pity. Your Honor, we need time to review these extensive liabilities. We cannot accept this offer today. Douglas leaned forward, the smirk vanishing, replaced by a flare of menacing anger. This is a courtesy, Thorne. It's the only lifeboat you're getting. You drag this out to trial, and the judge will see these financials. Rachel will be liable for half of that $42 million. She'll be working the drive-through at a fast food joint to pay off the interest. He glared at Rachel. Take the deal, Rachel. Stop being an idiot. Rachel felt the familiar sting of his intimidation tactics, the tone he used to make her feel small and stupid. She took a slow breath, forcing her voice to tremble slightly. We decline. For now. As they packed up to leave, William Vance leaned in close to Zachary. You're out of your league, Thorne. Go back to defending slip and falls. You're going to get her destroyed. Zachary just smiled, a dull, vacuous smile. Have a great day, William. That night, Rachel and Ashley sat on the floor of Ashley's living room, surrounded by empty coffee cups and printed documents. He's using the marina project as the scapegoat for the missing money, Rachel said, staring at the ceiling. He claimed they lost $8 million on it. But where did the money go? Zachary said we need an asset. What did he buy? I've been tracking Paige's social media, Ashley said, furiously typing on her laptop. She's been careful not to post Douglas. But look at this. Ashley turned the laptop. It was an Instagram photo from Paige's account, posted 2 days ago. Paige was standing on the grand balcony of a massive, modern architectural marvel, overlooking a private coastline. The caption read, Manifested my dream home. Number blessed number new beginnings. It's a $12 million house, Ashley said grimly. That's where the money went. He bought her a doomsday mansion. Rachel zoomed in on the photo. The architecture was distinct, lots of glass, steel, and a very specific type of imported black slate on the patio. But it wasn't the house that caught Rachel's attention. It was the background, the jagged shape of the coastline, the specific cluster of ancient, twisted pine trees, leaning out over the water in the distance. Rachel's heart stopped. The blood roared in her ears. "I know where that is," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling not with fear, but with the explosive realization of a massive, fatal error. "Where?" Ashley asked. "The Caymans? Street Barts?" "No," Rachel said, scrambling for her own laptop. "It's in Maine, Acadia coastline." Rachel frantically logged into a county property tax portal. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. 14 years ago, right after we got married, Douglas and I bought 100 acres of undeveloped coastline in Maine. It was supposed to be our dream retirement spot. We bought it for practically nothing. Over the years, Douglas got obsessed with his commercial properties and forgot about it. He told me he transferred it to a corporate holding company years ago to save on taxes. Rachel hit enter on the search query. The deed record populated on the screen. "He didn't," Rachel breathed. A savage, terrifying smile spreading across her face. Douglas had funneled $12 million of stolen marital assets into building a mega mansion for his mistress. He had routed the money through the Caymans and used the dummy corporation Apex page to pay the contractors to build it. He thought he had hidden it perfectly. But Douglas, in his supreme arrogance, had built the $12 million Mistress mansion on the exact plot of undeveloped land he already owned. And because he had neglected the paperwork 14 years ago, the land was never transferred to a corporation. It was still held in a joint tenancy. Rachel turned the laptop toward Ashley, pointing a shaking finger at the owner of record line on the deed for the land underneath the $12 million house. It read, "Douglas Reed and Rachel Reed." "He built her house on my land," Rachel said, the smirk now belonging entirely to her. "Legally. I own half of Page's mansion, and the asset is right here in the United States." The hidden detail, the fatal oversight, the trap was set, and Douglas had just locked himself inside it. The air inside Zachary Thorne's cramped office was thick with the scent of old paper and the electrifying jolt of vindication. It was 8 a.m. the following morning. Rachel and Ashley sat across from Zachary, watching as he meticulously reviewed the printed deed to the main property. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the hum of the dying air conditioning unit and the rhythmic tap of Zachary's pen against his desk. Zachary leaned back in his squeaky chair, his rumpled tie hanging loosely around his neck. He looked up at Rachel, his eyes devoid of their usual exhausted haze. Instead, they burned with a terrifying, predatory intelligence. "Do you understand what he's done here?" Zachary asked, his voice a low, reverent whisper. "This isn't just a mistake, Rachel. This is a monument to his own hubris. Let me explain the law of fixtures to you." Zachary stood up, grabbing a whiteboard marker. He drew a quick, crude sketch of a house sitting on a patch of land. In real estate law, there is a fundamental principle. When you build a permanent structure on a piece of land, that structure is legally considered affixed to the property. It becomes part of the land itself. It doesn't matter who paid the contractors. It doesn't matter whose name is on the Cayman Island bank account that funded the cement. He pointed the marker directly at Rachel. "Douglas built a $12 million structure on land that you co-own. By law, the moment that foundation was poured, 50% of that house became yours. But it gets better." Ashley leaned forward, her accountant's mind racing. "How could it get better? Half of $12 million is $6 million. That wipes out the fake debt." "Because he used marital funds to build it," Zachary countered, a feral grin spreading across his face. "If he had used his own premarital inheritance, you'd get half. But he stole from the joint marital estate, the so-called bankrupt Reed Enterprises, to build a secret asset on jointly owned land without your consent. Under equitable distribution laws, a judge isn't just going to give you half. A judge is going to look at his attempt to defraud the court, his attempt to hide $12 million, and they will likely award you the entire property as punitive damages. He didn't just build Paige a house. He built you an estate." Rachel stared at the crude drawing on the whiteboard. For weeks, she had felt like she was suffocating under the weight of Douglas's power. She had been exiled from her home, her accounts frozen, her future reduced to a terrifying void. But now, she held the leash. The sensation was intoxicating. "We need proof," Rachel said, her voice turning crisp and commanding. "A deed is a piece of paper. I need to know exactly what is sitting on that land. If William Vance finds out about this, before we lock it down, He'll try to bulldoze the property or falsify backdated transfer documents. Exactly, Zachary agreed. We don't breathe a word of this. We play the terrified victims. But Rachel, I need you to go to Maine. I need you to lay eyes on this property. Take photos. But more importantly, we need a licensed surveyor to officially record the GPS coordinates of the structure and file an updated topographical map with the county clerk. Once that's on the public record, Vance can't make it disappear. 2 days later, Rachel stepped out of a rented SUV onto the rugged, windswept coastline of Acadia, Maine. The air was sharp, biting with the heavy scent of salt, pine needles, and crushed granite. The sky above was a brilliant, bruised purple, threatening rain. She stood at the edge of the property line, her breath hitching in her throat. The Instagram photo hadn't done it justice. It was a monstrous, breathtaking marvel of modern architecture. 3 stories of sheer glass and blackened steel jutted out over the cliff face, anchored into the ancient bedrock. It looked like a billionaire's fortress. A winding driveway made of crushed white shells led up to massive, wrought iron security gates. Rachel didn't feel heartbroken looking at the love nest her husband had built for his mistress. She felt an icy, calculating thrill. My house, she thought, tracing the property line with her eyes. Beside her, a grizzled local surveyor named Tom adjusted his heavy tripod. He peered through his theodolite, punching numbers into a rugged tablet. Well, Mrs. Reed, Tom muttered, chewing on a toothpick. I've surveyed this stretch of coast for 30 years. Your husband sure picked a hell of a spot. State-of-the-art retaining walls, heated driveway. They even ran a private, high-capacity fiber optic line right through the bedrock. Can you confirm the structure is entirely within the bounds of the original deed? Rachel asked, wrapping her coat tighter against the ocean chill. Oh, absolutely, Tom nodded, pulling up a digital map on his tablet. Look here. These red lines are the boundaries from your joint deed filed 14 years ago. This blue box is the footprint of the new structure. It sits dead center on your land. Legally speaking, ma'am, whoever built this essentially gifted it to the deed holders. Thank you, Tom. Rachel smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. Please expedite the filing to the county clerk. I'll double your fee. As Tom packed up his gear, Rachel walked closer to the security gates. She could see the massive, floor-to-ceiling windows of the primary living room. Inside, she saw the silhouette of a woman. It was Paige. She was pacing the living room, holding a glass of wine, gesturing animatedly at her phone. Rachel pulled out her camera, attaching a telephoto lens she had bought specifically for this trip. She snapped several high-resolution photos through the gates. She captured the luxury cars parked in the driveway, a brand-new Range Rover and Douglas's vintage Porsche. She captured Paige. And, most importantly, she captured the address placard bolted to the stone pillar of the gate. While Rachel was standing in the freezing Maine wind, Douglas was sitting in the climate-controlled perfection of his penthouse in New York, swirling a glass of Macallan 25. He was on the phone with William Vance. She hasn't signed the settlement yet, William, Douglas snapped, his patience fraying. It's been 4 days. You said the shock and awe tactic would break her immediately. You said she'd take the $250,000 just to avoid the debt. Patience. Douglas, William's smooth, oily voice drifted through the speaker. She's broke. Her sister can only float her for so long. Thorne is a bottom feeder. He's probably trying to squeeze a few extra thousand out of us to cover his own meager contingency fee. We have a deposition scheduled for Thursday. We will put her on the record, humiliate her with the debt ledgers, and she will fold. Douglas sighed, rubbing his temples. Paige is getting restless. She wants to move out of the city permanently. She wants to host an engagement party at the main house next weekend. I need Rachel out of the picture before then. I can't have my psychotic ex-wife making a scene. The main property is completely shielded, Douglas, William reassured him. Apex Page Holdings is an impenetrable fortress. Rachel doesn't even know what an offshore trust is, let alone how to find one. Just stick to the script. At the deposition, emphasize the bankruptcy. Let me do the heavy lifting. Douglas hung up, a smug smile returning to his face. He had won. He had manipulated the market, hidden his wealth, and discarded the dead weight of his marriage. By this time next week, he would be a legally single man, drinking champagne on the balcony of a $12 million estate with a beautiful young woman on his arm. He had planned for every contingency, every variable, except for one. The conference room in William Vance's high-rise law firm was designed to intimidate. The walls were paneled in rare, imported mahogany. The massive table was a single slab of polished black marble. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying, godlike view of the Manhattan skyline. It was an environment built to make opposing counsel feel small, poor, and desperate. Rachel sat quietly next to Zachary, her posture perfectly rigid, her hands folded over a simple legal pad. She wore the same beige dress from the mediation. She kept her eyes downcast, playing the role of the terrified, broken wife to absolute perfection. Across the marble table, Douglas looked like a king holding court. He wore a pinstripe suit, his diamond cufflinks catching the morning sun. He lounged in his ergonomic leather chair, exuding an aura of untouchable arrogance. William Vance sat beside him, flanked by two junior associates who looked like eager, aggressive sharks in training. A court reporter sat at the head of the table, her fingers poised over her stenotype machine. "Let the record reflect we are here for the sworn deposition of Douglas Reed," William announced, his voice booming in the quiet room. He shot a condescending smirk at Zachary. "Mr. Thorne, whenever you are ready to conclude this exercise in futility." Zachary didn't rise to the bait. He looked rumpled, his tie slightly askew, shuffling a stack of seemingly disorganized papers. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," Zachary mumbled, pushing his glasses up his nose. He looked directly at Douglas. "Mr. Reed, you understand you are under oath today? That your testimony carries the penalty of perjury?" "I am fully aware of the law, Thorne," Douglas sneered, checking his watch. "Let's get this over with. I have real businesses to run. Or, at least, what's left of them." "Right, the businesses." Zachary nodded, pulling a document from his pile. "Mr. Reed, you signed a sworn financial affidavit last Tuesday, detailing the entirety of your assets and liabilities. Is this your signature?" Zachary slid the paper across the marble. Douglas barely glanced at it. "Yes, that is my signature, and in this affidavit, you claim that Reed Enterprises, and you personally, are carrying $42 million in debt. You also claim that your liquid assets are virtually zero. Is that correct?" "That is correct," Douglas said smoothly, leaning forward. "The commercial market took a massive downturn. We lost heavy capital on the Marina project. Over $8 million. Evaporated. It's a tragedy, really, but that's the risk of real estate." "A tragedy indeed," Zachary murmured, writing something down on his legal pad. "Mr. Reed, I want to be very clear for the record. Other than the primary marital residence which you claim is in pre-foreclosure and the heavily leveraged commercial properties listed in this binder, do you own any other real estate? Anywhere in the world?" William Vance shifted slightly in his chair. It was a standard question, but William was a man who preferred to control every narrative thread. Douglas laughed, a short, arrogant sound. "If I owned other real estate, Thorne, I would sell it to cover the crushing debt my company is currently drowning in. No, I do not own any other real estate." Zachary stopped writing. He looked up, his eyes locking onto Douglas's. "Are you absolutely certain, Mr. Reed? Sometimes, wealthy individuals place assets in trusts or holding companies. For instance, do you have any beneficial ownership in any property held by a corporation, offshore or otherwise?" Douglas's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. He felt a tiny, almost microscopic prickle of unease, but his ego quickly squashed it. Thorne was fishing. It was a desperate, blind cast into the dark. There was no way this strip mall lawyer could pierce the Apex Page shell company. The Caymans wouldn't even confirm the company existed without a federal warrant, which Thorne would never get. "I answered the question," Douglas said, his voice dropping to a cold, hard edge. "I own no other real estate. Period." "Understood," Zachary said, his voice entirely neutral. "Now, regarding undeveloped land. 14 years ago, you and Mrs. Reed purchased a plot of land in Maine, Acadia County, parcel number 409B. Do you still own that land?" Rachel kept her head down, but beneath the table, her fingernails dug painfully into her own palms. This was the moment. The tripwire. Douglas rolled his eyes, letting out an exasperated sigh. "That patch of rocks?" "No. I transferred that useless land to a holding company a decade ago and liquidated it to fund our first major commercial build. It's gone. It has been gone for years. It was a lie. A massive, catastrophic lie born of Douglas's supreme overconfidence. He had intended to transfer it years ago, but in his relentless pursuit of bigger deals, he simply hadn't filed the paperwork. And because the land was practically worthless at the time, he had never bothered to mention it to William Vance when they were constructing his fake bankruptcy. He had hidden his own asset from his own lawyer. Beside him, William Vance looked bored, making notes in his margins. Vance didn't know Douglas was lying. Vance believed the affidavit was bulletproof because he had built it based on what Douglas had told him. Zachary stared at Douglas for a long, agonizing moment. The silence in the room stretched until it felt fragile, ready to snap. Zachary looked down at his notes, then back up at the court reporter. "Did you get that?" Zachary asked the reporter softly. "Yes, Mr. Thorne," the reporter replied, her fingers resting on the keys. Zachary closed his folder. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply looked at Douglas with the cold, clinical expression of a butcher assessing a slab of meat. "I have no further questions for this deponent at this time." Douglas smirked, adjusting his cuffs as he stood up. "That's it? You dragged me down here to ask about a worthless rock pile from 14 years ago. You truly are a pathetic excuse for a lawyer. Thorne, Rachel, I strongly advise you to sign the settlement by Friday, because after the hearing, the offer goes to zero." Rachel finally looked up. She met Douglas's arrogant, mocking gaze. She didn't cry. She didn't look terrified. She gave him a slow, chilling smile. "I'll see you in court, Douglas," Rachel whispered. That evening, Rachel sat in Ashley's kitchen, her laptop open. The trap was set. Douglas had just committed perjury on the official court record. He had sworn, under oath, that he did not own the main property, and that he had no other real estate. He had sworn he was broke. "Look at this," Ashley said, sliding her phone across the table. It was Paige's Instagram again. The newest photo showed Paige standing in the massive glass living room of the main house. She was wearing a stunning white designer dress. The room behind her was being decorated with hundreds of white roses and string lights. The caption read, "The final countdown. Tomorrow, we celebrate our forever in our new home. Number. Engagement number. New chapter number. Acadia Estate." "He's throwing the engagement party tomorrow night," Ashley said, her eyes wide. "The night before your final court hearing." Rachel stared at the photo. Douglas was going to celebrate his stolen wealth and his new bride in the house he built with Rachel's money, on Rachel's land, just hours before he planned to legally bankrupt her in court. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the man was almost impressive. "Let him celebrate," Rachel said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper as she closed her laptop. "Let him pop the champagne. Let him think he's won. Because on Friday morning, I am going to take everything he loves, and I am going to burn it to the ground." Friday morning, the courtroom air was frigid. Rachel sat beside Zachary, wearing a sharp crimson blazer, her posture rigid. Douglas entered like a conquering emperor, flashing a smirk of supreme condescension. William Vance immediately presented his heavy binders, arguing the estate carried $42 million in debt and offering a meager $250,000 settlement. Judge Harrison peered over his glasses. "Unless you've found buried treasure, Mr. Thorne, I'm inclined to agree." Zachary stood, his demeanor razor sharp. "Your Honor, Mr. Vance's disclosures are fiction. There is no debt. The money was laundered to build a hidden asset." "Objection," Vance drawled. "Defamatory accusations. I have proof," Zachary stated, dropping a document in front of Vance. 2 days ago, Mr. Reed testified under penalty of perjury that he owned no other real estate. He claimed parcel 409B in Maine was sold. It wasn't. Zachary turned to the judge. "This is the current deed. The land is still held in joint tenancy by Douglas and Rachel Reed." Douglas's smirk faltered. Vance hissed, "What is he talking about?" Furthermore, Zachary's voice boomed, signaling his assistant to turn on the courtroom monitor. High-resolution photos of the Maine mega mansion filled the screen. "Mr. Reed used $12 million in stolen marital funds to build a luxury estate for his mistress on land his wife legally co-owns." The courtroom erupted in gasps. Vance's face turned mottled purple as he realized his client had made him an accessory to a massive fraud. Douglas stared at the screen, sheer terror draining the blood from his face. Under the doctrine of fixtures, Zachary concluded, The house belongs to the deed holders. We request an immediate asset freeze, full ownership of the main estate for Mrs. Reed as punitive damages, and a referral for criminal perjury charges. The silence in the room was absolute. Rachel looked across the table at the trembling, ruined man who had tried to leave her destitute. She leaned forward and offered a cold, victorious smile. "Take it all, Douglas," she whispered. "Take half of absolutely zero." The morning sun blasted through the Acadia Estate's massive windows, waking a severely hungover Paige. She reached for her phone, expecting a triumphant text from Douglas. Instead, heavy, aggressive pounding shook the front door. She threw on a cashmere robe and descended the glass staircase, ripping the door open to scold whoever was interrupting her morning. She froze. A towering Acadia County sheriff stood on the porch, flanked by police cruisers and a sleek black town car. "Eviction notice, ma'am," the sheriff growled, thrusting a clipboard at her. As of 9:30 a.m., the corporate veil of Apex Page Holdings was pierced. "This property legally belongs to Rachel Reed as punitive damages for marital fraud." Page's world tilted. "No. Douglas bought this for me. Let me call him." She dialed frantically. Voicemail. "He won't answer." An icy voice echoed from the driveway. Rachel stepped out of the town car, wearing her sharp crimson blazer, looking every inch the conquering queen. Ashley flanked her, a victorious grin on her face. Page stumbled back. "You aren't supposed to be here." "I own the place," Rachel said coolly, surveying the $12 million fortress. "Sheriff, how long does she have?" 30 minutes to collect personal clothing only," the sheriff replied. "All furniture, vehicles, and jewelry purchased with marital funds stay." Paige shrieked, tears ruining her mascara. "Douglas gave me the Range Rover." "With money he stole from me," Rachel corrected, her voice hardening to steel. "It stays. Get packing." 30 minutes later, a sobbing Paige dragged a single duffel bag down the long crushed shell driveway toward a waiting Uber. "Paige," Rachel called out softly. Paige turned, hoping for a shred of mercy. "The vintage diamond necklace. My grandmother's." "Take it off." Choking on a sob, Paige unclasped the necklace and dropped it into Rachel's waiting palm. Rachel smiled, turning back to the sprawling mansion. "Come on, Ash," she said. "Let's redecorate." In Manhattan, Douglas paced his lavish penthouse like a trapped rat. His phone was exploding with missed calls from furious lenders and his CFO. The news of the courtroom disaster had already spread. The elevator chimed. William Vance stepped out, flanked by 2 burly private security guards. "William, tell me you filed an emergency appeal to block the freeze." Douglas begged, his panic boiling over. "You lied to me," Vance spat, his voice deadly quiet. "You signed a sworn affidavit stating you had no other assets. You made me an accessory to your perjury. It was a tactical maneuver. We just need to stall." William let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "The judge signed the asset freeze 20 minutes after we left court. Every bank account is locked. But it gets worse." He tossed a thick envelope onto the glass table. "The moment the transcript went public, your lenders invoked the fraud clauses. They are calling in the $42 million debt immediately. Your fake bankruptcy just triggered a real one. Reed Enterprises is dead." Douglas sank to his knees, his hands gripping his hair. The trap had closed entirely around him. "I am withdrawing as your counsel," William continued mercilessly. "That envelope also contains a lawsuit for unpaid legal fees. Oh, and the DA is convening a grand jury on Monday. You're being indicted for first-degree perjury and grand larceny. Get a public defender." Vance stepped back into the elevator, leaving Douglas completely alone. Desperate, Douglas lunged for his phone, dialing Paige. It went straight to voicemail, followed immediately by a text message. From Paige. "Rachel took the house. You have nothing. Don't ever contact me again." Douglas stared at the screen as the words blurred. His empire was in ashes. He hadn't just lost the game. He had destroyed his own life, piece by arrogant piece. 1 year later, Rachel stood on the terrace of her original Westchester estate, sipping black coffee in the crisp autumn air. She hadn't just survived the divorce. She had thrived. After selling the main mega mansion to a tech billionaire, she used the massive capital injection to save her home from foreclosure and launch Foundation Realty, a highly successful ethical development firm. She was no longer the quiet wife. She was a powerhouse CEO. Hours later, she sat in the front row of the packed New York State criminal court. A side door opened. Two armed bailiffs escorted Douglas Reed into the room. The transformation was shocking. Dressed in a cheap, ill-fitting county jumpsuit, Douglas was gaunt, his hair overgrown, his posture broken. The arrogant billionaire was gone, replaced by a defeated ghost. He had pled guilty to perjury and grand larceny. The judge slammed her gavel, glaring down at him. In my 20 years on the bench, Mr. Reed, I have rarely seen such arrogant deceit. Your actions show a complete disregard for the law. The judge looked toward the gallery. Does the victim wish to make a statement? Rachel stood and walked to the podium. For the first time in a year, their eyes met. Douglas's were hollow and pleading. Rachel felt absolutely nothing for him. Your Honor, Rachel said, her voice clear and strong. A year ago, he told me I would walk away with nothing but the clothes on my back. He tried to destroy me. Instead, he showed me exactly what I was capable of. I have rebuilt my life. I ask only that the court sentence him according to the law. She sat back down, rendering him completely irrelevant. It was a masterclass in grace. Douglas Reed, I sentence you to 5 to 8 years in the state penitentiary, the judge ruled. The gavel fell with finality. As the bailiffs dragged him away in handcuffs, Rachel walked out the heavy oak doors and into the brilliant, warming sunlight, her beautiful, hard-won future waiting. Arrogance is a trap we set for ourselves, and Douglas Reed walked blindly into his own making. He believed his wealth and cruelty made him untouchable, but karma has a flawless memory. Rachel didn't need to fight dirty to win. She simply used his own hubris against him, proving the best revenge is building an incredible life from the ashes they tried to leave you in. If Rachel's brilliant comeback and Douglas's brutal karma gave you chills, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more epic drama. What would you have done? Let us know in the comments below.